Okay, and we're live. And as a reminder, this call, as all calls, will be recorded and posted online. And with that, we can get started. For scribing, does anyone?
I can scribe.
Okay, cool, thanks. And for the next call, I actually have a conflict, and potentially other folks on the Chrome team also. From like basically throughout this entire week for the slot that is currently like the call is currently at. So for the next call as a one-time event, we could have the call either significantly earlier or significantly later. So same day, but either 8 a.m. Pacific time or 1 p.m. Pacific time. Does that work for folks? Do folks have a preference, one way or the other?
Either of those are fine with me.
Fine by me as well. I think you are the most affected being in Europe.
Yeah, but I'm not like Gilles and other Wikipedia folks are similarly affected. So I guess if West Coast folks can make 8 a.m., then that would be the best option, I think. If that.
This is for May 7th?
Yes, only the 7th.
Okay, I'm in.
Okay, cool. So let's go with 8 a.m. Awesome, thank you. And now the first order of business that I wanted to talk about was rechartering. So we have basically our current charter is gonna run till the end of June, so June 30th. And we need to recharter. So I prepared a charter document that is more or less based off of the existing charter. I didn't change a lot other than the latest publications and whatnot. But I wanted to run by folks a few things. Like, first of all, if anyone who's interested would be able to go over the charter document and leave comments, that would be highly appreciated. Otherwise, I wanted to make sure that we have agreement on the larger themes that we want to focus on during the next charter period. That doesn't mean we'll abandon existing work. It just means that forward-facing work is likely to find itself in one of those buckets. And I'm not yet sure how to phrase the charter language with those larger themes in mind, but I wanted to first run it by the group to make sure that we are all aligned on the same themes. So as you can probably see, I think we have been focused on on multi-page loading performance for a long while, and while it's super important, it's not the full picture. So I'd love for us to focus more on SPA performance, runtime performance, to continue the various hey, Alex. So, hey, Alex, just for context, we are talking about rechartering. We started a couple minutes ago and talking about rechartering. So, yeah, SPA performance and figuring out a way in which we can better, have a better way of measuring single page apps and soft navigations. runtime performance, so extend the work that we did on long tasks and make sure that we are able to measure runtime performance as well. And finally, user experience metrics. We've talked about layout instability, and I believe folks in the group are supportive, and I will also ask whether we are interested in adopting this particular metric, but generally, I think this is an area we can focus on and take on. And otherwise, there's a bunch of work on improving the privacy and security stories around our current opt-ins, and in correlation with the work that the WebAppSec is doing on isolated context and corp, co-app, co-op, and all these other acronyms that start with co. So does that make sense for folks? Is there something missing from that list, or any objections?
SPA performance, awesome.
I like the privacy and security, obviously, because I'm the one who have to face from time to time those folks. Yeah, I think if we can make a progress in the next few years about the infamous issue on high resolution time, they would be greatly thankful to us.
Yeah, so we can talk about that specifically further down the call, as we have a bunch of issues open on HR time, but yeah.
Yeah, but as you said, we have to work with the WebAppSec for that. It's not something that I think we can resolve by ourselves.
No, but WebAppSec are working on primitives that are related to that, and Corp specifically, and we need like Corp and like co-app and co-op, and we need to work with them to basically integrate the impact of those new primitives on our APIs. Okay, so I don't hear any objections. Is that a correct statement? Cool.
Yep.
Okay. So otherwise, there's a question that I wanted to ask the group regarding various related incubations. So there is a long list of incubations that were presented to the group, have been like, basically, it was obvious that when they graduate, they would graduate to the Web Performance Working Group. And I'd like to, I wonder if we're already there on some of them, or potentially all of them. I know that we already talked about is input pending, and we concluded that we'll send a CFC that never actually happened. That's on me. But I wonder if folks have strong feelings regarding adoption of the other specs on that list, and maybe we need to talk about them one by one, or would that make sense? Just go over the list one by one and see what folks think.
Maybe we can do that and run a poll as well to see which ones of them are considered to be the most important.
Sure, I can.
I mean, let's see how the conversation is going, but was a suggestion for after the conversation.
Sure. The thing is, is there a limit for the number of proposals that we want to integrate?
There is no limit, but if only one user, for example, says this spec is important to us, that tells us that maybe we don't want to spend as much time on this one compared to others. I think it would be nice to figure out both from an implementation side, so getting the feedback from from Google, Apple, Mozilla, and others on those specs, but also getting the user side as well, like Steven, for example, to see, which one of those is more important from his user side point of view.
Okay.
And same thing with the Wikimedia and so on.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe we can just go over them one by one and see what folks think. Event timing is a proposal that Nicholas has been working on to basically measure the timing of events. We talked about also like first input delay is something that has shipped in Chrome, which is a part of that larger proposal. And now Nicholas is working on the rest of it. It basically enables developers to measure slow events and be able to report them. And it's, and as such is targeted as a interactivity metric. In terms of, in terms of maturity, part of that has shipped in Chromium. Other parts are still being worked on. And I wonder what folks think about potentially adopting that to the working group.
And Yov, are you more interested in implementators' interest in this, or consumers' interest, or both?
Both. Yeah. So folks who would like
to I think it would be good to clarify what are the, because I don't know actually, what are the criteria for adoption? Because right now we're just talking about it, but it's not super clear what's the criteria for how the decision is made.
Yeah, I would love to see this kind of tie back into these larger themes that you identified above.
Okay, so I would say that ties back to the runtime performance larger theme as an interactivity metric. This enables developers to measure frustrated users in the wild. So everything that this will every entry that event timing will surface is an entry where the site has failed to respond quickly to user input.
And user experience, as part of a user experience metric too, just.
Yes.
Okay.
Potentially, yeah. I guess like it's more specific than user experience, but yeah, but sure. So I'm not looking for commitment here. I think like we will need to send a call for consensus either way. I'm just trying to understand if there's appetite from implementers to adopt this and potentially work on those features. And then from web developer side, what's the...
From a consumer's point of view, at Akamai with Impulse, we definitely are interested in event timing because of first input delay and just the ability to measure more of these events. Obviously, we have a lot of our customers asking to get access to this data in a more reliable way than we have today. The way that we do it today is just measuring all of the events, not very easily. So yeah, event timing is something we're shipping in Boomerang and would love to see it adopted a bit more for better, more consistent measurement.
Okay, so you're already measuring that using various hacks, and this will enable you to unhack Boomerang. Okay, that's great input. Thanks.
Yep.
Yoav, if you want, I can take that list and somehow reply or update a document or create a document with what, for example, for Salesforce, which one are the most important and which one is the least interesting for us.
Okay. Maybe that's the best. Yeah.
Rather, which ones are useful to you and which ones are not.
Right. Right now, I'm just saying, like, instead of doing it now, I can put it in a document if for later.
Yeah, so maybe this would be a better use of everyone's time, just to do that as a homework exercise. Go over the list. I believe the document is world, like anyone can comment. So if you could just comment on the document with the level of interest for adopting either one of those proposals, and then we could take it from there. Benjamin, do
you want to just do a prioritized list?
I don't know if we need priorities, because I don't know that we have a quota.
You just want up down?
Basically a Boolean or maybe more than a Boolean signal, but this is something we are interested in adopting, opposed to adopting, and neutral, I guess. That would be like a...
Yeah, and perhaps could you send an email, like not an official call for consensus, but rather an email saying these are the potential APIs that we could incubate, and then other people that didn't join this call can also kind of do their homework as well?
Yes, that makes perfect sense. Thanks. So yeah, I will send that out to the list. And otherwise, I have a bunch of questions here regarding the charter language, but it's mostly questions that I can take offline with Philippe. And yeah, I think we can move on to other issues. But again, I would highly appreciate folks reviewing the charter document and seeing if it all makes sense for you.
You want follow-up comments on the mailing list, or what? How do you want comment?
You can comment on the doc itself or on the mailing list if that's more convenient, but just the doc is open for, like, a worldwide open for comments. So anyone with a link can comment. So yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Okay. And
you has been answering some of your questions as comment on the document as well.
Okay.
By the way.
Cool. Thank you. Okay. So that maybe we can move on to the discussion on the registry. There's like, Nicholas, do you want to lead that? The event timing registry changes.
Yeah, so right now we have the performance observer in it. It's like a dictionary where you can have some parameters for the observe method of the performance observer. However, there is no way in the spec to filter out entries whenever a performance entry matches the type of the observer. So as the spec is right now, like every observer receives every entry of the given entry type. The only thing we have is the buffered flag, where we manually add the entries to the observer when you observe with the buffered flag, like the previously created entries. So this proposal is to add an algorithm which you can call whenever you're about to add an entry to a performance observer to see if that entry is actually eligible to be added to the performance observer. So this, for example, works for the event timing duration threshold, which we talked about at last call. where you can now specify a threshold different from the default one, and you can check against that threshold to see if you add the entry to the observer or not. Does that make sense?
And I believe this would be similar to if we were to, for example, want to add a similar threshold for long tasks, right?
Yeah. In fact, that's why I called it duration threshold. So each, I guess, the threshold could be reused for long tasks, maybe have different minimum values that you can use or whatever that would be specified in the algorithm for the entry type. But you could even reuse the parameter. So for event timing, we intend to have a minimum of 16. So if the duration value is 16 or more, then you create an entry and you can observe it in the performance observer. So that will be specified in an algorithm which will be linked to the column of the corresponding column or row of the row of a performance event timing. So right now, as you can see, all of them just, this is like the draft PR, all of them just say return true, which is what would be the default right now. Basically, every entry where the entry type matches the performance observer will be just added to the observer. But over time, if we add other parameters to the observe method, then we can add an algorithm in the relevant spec and just link it here so that you can filter out some of those entries for the observer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the actual algorithms themselves, if I understand correctly, will be implemented in the relevant spec. It's just that the registry will have a pointer to that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the idea. Correct. And we will only add the algorithm if it's not the default, because it doesn't make sense to just add the default one. So just return true if there's no relevant parameters.
As long as the document doesn't normatively define anything, we're good. Basically, that it's a helper table that allow you to figure out what exists in terms of entries and a quick view, but all of the normative text should go into the respective specifications.
Yeah. This will be just a pointer.
Yeah.
So does that make general sense for folks? There any comments?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so I guess we can land the PR. Cool. Otherwise, a couple of or 3 issues that were filed against HR Time, NF and Catherine from Mozilla, basically missing definitions. So this is all just work, arguably. So 3 different hooks that are missing. My main question was regarding publishing, because I don't think we want to, like, this is not HR Time L3 work. This is something that will go into L2, which is already in rec. So can we just update do we update the regular, the L2 branch or the master branch, and then
Well, so I think, right now the process as it is currently defined says if you're making a substantive change, you have to go back to CR. Otherwise, if it's only editorial, you don't have to go back to CR.
Those are not substantive, right? Because they're just exposing a new definition.
Exactly, and that's why I was getting to. It's kind of like, well, it's not adding a new feature in the spec. It's just adding an abstract definition. So it could be considered. I'm gonna have to double check with the director, but I would say let's see if we can make that change. In any case, I mean, it's still going to be called L2 if we want it to be called L2. By the way, it's just that with the current process, we would be forced to go back all the way to CR if we wanted to make such a change, which is a little bit annoying, and what process 2020 is trying to fix.
Yeah.
My suggestion is let's follow on the editorial path until we get told that we cannot.
Okay, yeah, I believe this is all editorial. It's just, yeah, adding a bunch of hooks and then and definition. Like, oh, it's not.
You linked 87 for all of them, but I fixed them now.
What was the? No.
You linked 87 in all of them, but
oh, okay.
You're looking at the same.
I did.
So 87 and 88, I think, are definitely editorial. 89, I think, has a question associated with it, like it might be.
Okay, so let me look at the actual 89. That is dependent on origin isolated.
Yeah, that's definitely not editorial.
That is not an editorial change. That is a change that the Ping folks would welcome, though.
Does it change current implementation?
Well, it depends what the change means, because it's not very clear.
So from my perspective, the way that I understand this change is that right now, implementations are free to have high resolution times up to 5 microseconds, and are also free to course them if they feel that security-wise this is not a wise thing to expose. This change will basically enforce, in a way, make it mandatory, potentially, or make it mandatory to coarsen the timers in non-cross-origin isolated contexts.
Wait, is cross-origin isolated like shipped on browsers yet?
So it's in the process of being shipped in order to enable shared array buffers. And the intent is to have shared array buffers only enabled in cross-origin isolated contexts, which means protected by CoAP and CoAP and Corp. It seems reasonable that if we're blocking shared array buffers in these contexts, we can also coarsen HR time in a normative way in these contexts.
Sure. There's a bunch of questions like what would be the new maximum coarseness when cross-origin isolated is not true, right? So
yes, I agree that is a question. I'm guessing it's somewhere between, like, right now on Android, Chrome is coarsening 100 to 100 microseconds, and the upper limit is 1 millisecond that is already exposed by date. Date.now. But yes, it is a question, and potentially, so we could decide that this reopens L2, or say that this will be L3. I don't know if that is a big enough change to justify L3? But
a related question. What's the status of thinking about moving to living standards? Because I thought there was some suggestion about it.
my understanding is that it's not yet on the table. Is that correct?
Well, there is a process for that being proposed, which hasn't gone yet to formal AC review, but is getting close to it. Timeline was to have this process available by the end of June. Last time when I talked to this group, you guys were not as extreme as some groups like Service Worker, where you only wanted to do living standards. You wanted to be able to do both, do versioning and living standards, which is perfectly fine. If you guys, right now our charter runs at the end of June. If you're telling me, and we don't have to make the decision today, is that you actually really would like to have the option for living standards, then what I'd suggest is to actually delay our new charter until we can adopt process 2020. So we will basically request an extension of 6 months, and as soon as process 2020 becomes available, we do a new AC review. Unfortunately, the new process will require an AC review because of the change in the plan policy. So I mean, unless you think that some of the incubating proposals are not today in scope and therefore we cannot publish them as we want, what I would recommend in that case is like, okay, let's just request an extension for now, and as soon as process 2020 becomes available, we send our new charter.
What do we need to do that?
Why do we need to do that? What do you mean by that question?
What do we need to just extend for 6 months instead of?
You just let me know and I'll do it.
Oh, okay. Let's have a vote. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess this is another question going back to the rechartering. Do we have a strong desire to move to a living standard model, at least for some of the specs?
I would like that option.
Yeah, for HR time, it makes a lot of sense, for example, right? Because
yes.
Hey, can someone summarize the pros and cons of living standard versus version standard?
Well, it doesn't necessarily have any impact on implementations, nor does it impact on, us necessarily making progress on the specification. If you want to talk about, from a marketing perspective, if you want to talk about high resolution time, version 1 version 2, for example, that could be useful. So it really depends on what we're trying to achieve with the resulting document. And if the answer is kind of like, we don't really care about versioning, then I say, well, you don't really care about recommendation, and living standard is good enough for you. I mean, both will guarantee that you have the plan commitments. And from a process-wise point of view, there are certainly more requirements to reach recommendation, but we may not care about what the requirements are.
Yeah, so
that's a short story.
Yeah, so basically, and I'm not sure what is the exact process that is currently being recommended, but right now, the way that we develop those specifications is that we start out from working draft for, resource timing. L1 started as a working draft, then as implementations picked up and it was tested, it was specified, it moved to candidate recommendation, then proposed recommendation, and finally to a recommendation. And at that point, if we want to add more features, which we do, we kick off resource timing level 2 and start the same process from the beginning. And then, when that is done, or when this will be done, we will do something similar for resource timing L3. the alternative model, the living standard model, is to start out something new as a working draft, then candidate recommendation, and then I believe that it stops there, and you get your patent commitments at candidate recommendation time, and
Correct.
we can just update the candidate recommendation as we go. So we never, like, the spec is never done. Unlike here, for example, HR time L2 was considered done. Until now, it isn't.
And to be clear, by the way, just because we're selecting one model doesn't mean that we are preventing the other model. You can do living standard that from time to time you take a snapshot and you stick a version number or whatever you want next to it if you want to. So the two stories are not incompatible. It's just that what do we need as a working group? What do we think the community needs as a working group as well? And just figuring out, within W3C, what is the best path to get what we need.
So Philippe, this is more like living standard is a repo, and then we could do a tagged version release off of it.
Yep.
Okay, great. Then that sounds much better, frankly, to me.
Okay, I'm divided on this, because on the one hand, the living standard model works a lot like software, where you just develop the feature and once in a while declare something to be a version, rather than work towards a version and then cut it and move to the next. At the same time, I think that the checkpoints that the level system gives us are actually healthy ones, that enable us to see that, okay, we have alignment on that set of features. We have tests for all of them. They pass in more than one implementation, and then we move on to develop that. So I would love for us to try to get the benefits of both, if at all possible. I don't yet know how, but maybe we can put in, internal or internal to the working group checks that will make sure that we're on the right path for interoperability with those different specifications, without having to go through the formal process and the whole CR, PR, rec process.
If we do things right, by the way, the PR rec process should become just a purely admin things. But you're right, the PR requires more checks than a CR. Like, for example, if we hadn't tried to move to propose recommendation, we wouldn't have been cornered by the privacy people on some of our high resolution time issues. So it's a forcing factor as well. And you're right, we can reproduce some of that by having an internal process within the working group. We can put, if we, so Ben, for example, you like the idea of living standards, but it's kind of like, so if we only have one implementer for that living standards, should we still have it as a living standard in the working group? And if we don't want that, then okay, so we have to set limits on ourselves as well. Otherwise,
I mean, we have one tasks, which is already.
Well, yeah, they are, yes, and there are drawbacks. And for those specs today, they cannot move to propose recommendation because they only have one implementations. But those specs would still be, they are only called collinear recommendation, but they will be able to be called living standards tomorrow or whatever the WCC come up with to otherwise. So that's where it's kind of like, from a community perspective, is they learn to understand, okay, there are all of those specs, which one can actually use or stuff like that. And part of the story is how we expose the spec to the outside world as well.
Okay.
I mean, so I haven't presented to the chairs yet the whole living standards things. I'm waiting for the process to have been reviewed by the SC before I start educating the working group and the chairs over it. That's why I didn't talk to you about this earlier. But to me, it's kind of like there will be the process and how actually we're going to make use of it from a web performance perspective. And I fully expect each group will look at it differently depending on their audience.
Okay. So I think I will send a couple of polls to the mailing list. So both regarding the incubations that we may or may not want to adopt, as well as opinions on living standard versus sticking to the current process, and then seeing how we can, basically, if there is a lot of appetite to move to the living standard model, then yes, maybe we should ask for an extension. And
okay. I mean, again, our scope of the charter has been pretty wide because that's usually what I recommend nowadays. So unless we think that the charter is limiting us in some fashion, it doesn't hurt for us to ask for an extension.
yeah, I don't think it limits us at the moment, but yeah, I mean, but it at the same time, it doesn't make sense to wait for an extension only to say in 6 months, yeah, finally, we don't really want to move to living standards.
Well, but in 6 months, we'll move to process 2020 in any case. So
Hey, can you detail that a little bit? If we recharter now and then WC3 moves to process 2020, would we have to do some additional step?
Yes, we would have to recharter explicitly because of the change of the patent, patent policy. It's a different patent policy, one that enables us to require patent commitments by CR.
So then we should just definitely wait.
Yeah, so you're saying in any case, regardless of our preference, we have to recharter in 6 months, so we might as well for an extension on the current one.
If we want to adopt process 20 in 6 months, we would have to recharter, yes. Yeah, unless we wait 6 months, we extend for 6 months and we all do the work. So we would have to do the SC review twice if we don't wait. That's what I'm saying.
So in process 2020, does that include only the living standard or regardless?
No, it includes everything, of course.
Yes.
So that's why I'm saying it doesn't hurt us to wait. And in any case, even if we choose not to do living standards, we're still at some point in the next 2 or 3 years will be asked to change process anyway.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense, and that's great input.
And like that, it gives us more time to figure out all of those polls and stuff like that as well.
Yeah.
All right. So can I take that as a decision that we want to extend, or should I? Do you want to run a CFC, Yoav?
Let me run I don't know if a CFC, but or maybe yes. Maybe,
as you like.
Yeah, let's formalize it.
Yeah, let's make it formal. So yes, we can ask whether, officially ask if folks want to wait for process 2020 or feel the need to recharter immediately. I suspect that not a lot of people will have a strong opinion, but yeah, okay, cool. Okay, so yes, I will take an action item to run this CFC, and then we'll keep you posted.
In the meantime, to go back to Anna's issues, by the way, I don't think we should delay on his issues just because of this. That wouldn't be fair to him.
Yeah.
So we can still do 87 and 88 under L2, and for 89 we can do under L3 and switch L3 to living standards once we have the new charter in 6 months, by the way.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
So I suggest that we do the changes in the tip of the repo without taking care too much about versioning. And once we're done and we merge those things, to look back at them and figure out which one we can backport to L2.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I'm also not 100% sure that the definition of isolated context has already fully landed. So it might be possible for us to, like, that it's not currently yet feasible to actually send a PR on HR time that defines this properly. I know that there are a bunch of in-flight PRs against HTML that define the various primitives that isolated contexts rely on. So yeah, we could, yeah. But in any case, it shouldn't, like, worst case, we can, hand wave some definition for now, pointing at the documents and the PRs, and then formalize it once they align.
Yoav, is there a good tracking issue that tracks all of those primitives that are going in? Like, is there something we can block this issue on so that it will get a nice friendly ping when it's ready?
I am not aware of a single issue. We could point at all of them, which is there is a PR to lend corp in HTML. I can find the links later and then add them to the minutes. There's a PR.
I was going to ask, who is defining corp?
It's originally it was defined in a gist by Anna van Kesteren, and now it's being formalized as part of HTML by Camille Ami from the Chrome team.
So yeah, so it makes sense to have an issue open in HTML that tracks all of the things that needs to change, similar to what we did with WebIDL a while ago when we suddenly did make some changes and we need all of the specs to replicate the change.
Yeah, yeah. So there's corp. There is coap, which is potentially more well defined. I think it's a separate specification that monkey patches HTML and fetch. And then there's the isolated context proposal from Mike West, and I don't know what's the status on that. And that basically ties all of these together into a new thing that HR time, for example, can rely on and say, only in isolated context can we expose high resolution timers. So yeah, it's.
Can we assign people to those issues, by the way, to make sure that one of us is going to look into those?
I can take that on.
Okay, thank you, Yoav.
Yeah. Okay, and with the 8 minutes we have left, let's take on something from the future topics. So we have a bunch of server timing related issues that are open. I don't know that. Okay, so similar issue from Anna van Kesteren, basically asking for a better definition of the creation time of performance server timing. Basically, I'm guessing that he's asking for, to better tie that processing into fetch or HTML. Yeah, that's basically, actually, so server timing is currently edited by Charlie Vazak. who hasn't been on this call for a while. Regarding the previous topic, Dominic Ferlino says that Corp and CoAP will be merged into HTML, and the issue is 53668. Okay, cool. Okay, and the independent specs for CoAP will be abandoned. Okay, so going back to server timing, I talked to Charlie the other day, and he said, like, ideally it would be great if he could remain the active owner, and then yes, those are those 3 issues require an active editor that will actually take a look at them. Oh, one is from Philippe, so I haven't. Yeah.
Oh, so you mean 65? Yes. I mean, it's on your agenda. You want me to talk to it a little bit?
Yeah, just let me finish my train of thought regarding 68 and 69. Ideally, yeah, I'll talk to Charlie if he could take a look at those and see if he can resolve them or sum up the required work. I can take an action item to do that. And yeah, let's talk about 65, using server timing to carry trace ID.
Yes, so this comes from the distributed tracing working group. So the distributed tracing working group, which I'm also involved in my spare time, is they are tracking requests going through within clouds, within the microservices, going within the clouds, and also interclouds as well. So then when something goes wrong, you can basically figure out which microservice failed and trace the entire, tree of requests that one request generated, so that you can figure out when things in your debugging tool, when things went wrong, and how each microservice handled the request as it was being propagated. Now, what they like to do, and this is where big things are becoming very scary, at least to me, is that they would like to be able to have have the browser also care about those information and relay those trace ID between the clouds as well. And a while ago, back in November last year, they were wondering, can we use server timing for that? Because it's identifiers coming from the servers that could be passed along and so on. Now, the latest has been as they moved away from attempting to use server timing. So, so I would suggest that we should close this issue with no action on that front, or saying that we don't recommend the use server timing to carry other information that's simply timing information. Now, the other worry that I have, which is sits time more related to server timing, is like right now we say we only carry timing information. But the fact is you can put whatever you want in those timing information, and it doesn't have to be timing information. It could be an ID as well.
Yeah.
So we should be very careful not to recreate third-party cookies in those mechanisms as well.
Yes, obviously. So I think that it's perfectly fine for them to use trace ID with server timing. The browser, I don't see the browser automatically sending that server timing from one server to another server, as this is a cross-origin communication mechanism that I don't think we want to create. And I think it goes beyond what, like, it sounds worse than third-party cookies. I mean,
Yes.
Because everyone is now the top level, or like, yeah.
Yep.
So I don't think we want to enable that. I think that if they want analytics scripts to read server timing trace IDs from multiple clouds and then send them to a single reporting endpoint, I think that is a reasonable use case. Server timing already supports that. Even if it's not timing information, that's fine from my perspective. But yeah, I don't. Yeah, and we had a conversation with them at TPAC, I think, in Lyon, where I basically I think they can use server timing as is, as well as a bunch of other. Yeah, they can just use server timing as is, define request headers that browsers shouldn't care about, but then use the browser, like use client-side code to collect that information from multiple servers and send that to their reporting endpoint. And the origins need to trust that client-side code to do the right thing. Yeah.
So I think you should answer that on the GitHub issue.
Okay.
That would be, I think, welcome. I can also point them to the video recording here, but
yeah. So
I don't think we are interested in extending our timing interface for them, because right now we're only exposing a description and a timing. We don't want to do anything else for them on that front.
I don't think so. I don't think, like, it's also not necessarily needed because they can have the trace ID be part of the description. I mean, it's hacky, but it works. So I will answer on the issue and then close it because, yeah, as you said, they're no longer pursuing that route.
They're no longer pursuing that route at the moment, yeah. And I suggested to them, you guys should take a tag review on your proposal sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Because my worry is like the browser vendors, as soon as they're causing to see that, they might say, no, thank you. So we'll see.
Yeah, that sounds like a reasonable thing for them to do. Yeah. Okay, and with that, we're at time. Thanks all, and I will see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Bye.
Bye.
Bye.